ESS Ecosystems and Ecology 2 Part 5 is the second movie on succession. This movie will dig into the system changes during succession. One significant idea is that succession leads to climax communities that may vary due to random events and interactions over time. This leads to a pattern of alternative stable states for a given ecosystem. The second significant idea is ecosystem stability, succession, and biodiversity are intrinsically linked. Here is the outline for ecosystems and ecology, topic 2 in the ESS syllabus. Use this outline to find the part you need. This movie has its focus right here. Here is the IB syllabus statement that will drive a large portion of this movie. Explain the changes in energy flow, gross and net productivity, diversity, and mineral cycling in different stages of succession. Here are the system parameters that change over time during succession. Come back to this list if you need to review one or the other. I will examine the successional change in each parameter through the next 25 slides or more. As succession occurs over time in a temperate deciduous forest, the structural complexity of the system increases. There are more niches, more developed decomposer community, and in a more complex system, the variety of nutrient and energy pathways contributes to stability. Continue to think about the change in food webs, the soil community, productivity, available niches, and more. Succession begins with bare earth, or nearly bare earth, so GPP, the rate of transformation of solar energy to chemical energy, would naturally be low. Since NPP depends on GPP, NPP would also be low at this stage. Gross productivity is low due to the unfavorable abiotic conditions and the low density of producers. The graph here displays GPP across successional time. You can see the GPP to be low early in succession due to the low density of producers resulting from the difficult abiotic conditions. But GPP increases over time as the density of producers increase, as the biomass is accumulating, as the producers get larger. And the GPP plateaus because producers only grow so big. The biomass of leaves that photosynthesize reach a maximum. Thus, GPP also reaches a maximum. In this photograph, we can see an early successional stage in the foreground. GPP is increasing here, but in this part of the image, GPP is higher as the forest is closer to the climax stage. GPP may well be leveling at a maximum rate as the system approaches the climax stage of succession. GPP is high late in succession due to the leaf canopy that becomes large but does reach a maximum size. But what about the trunk and roots? The trunk and roots are not photosynthetic, but they do respire. And there's a lot of non-photosynthetic respiratory tissue here. So that brings me to show you what respiration is doing through succession. In early succession, rates of respiration are low due to the low density of producers, but also because the plants tend to be small, the quantity of shoot and root tissue tends to be small. GPP is higher than respiration in early stages of succession because the pioneer species, such as grasses, are fully photosynthetic, stem and leaf. Think about it. Grasses, as you look at them, are entirely green, entirely photosynthetic. This can't be said of trees, the climax species in succession. As the producers increase in size, respiration increases, and with trunk and root tissue becoming larger and larger as a proportion of the entire system, respiration increases dramatically through succession. Now, if you're thinking ahead, when GPP and respiration are equal, their ratio is 1 and NPP is 0. The greater the difference between GPP and respiration, the larger the NPP. Tree species, perennials, have a lot of photosynthetic tissue, so GPP is high late in succession, but they also have a lot of trunk and root. In other words, a lot of respiratory tissue. Thus, the GPP respiration ratio will approach 1. and this means that NPP will be small, if not zero, late in succession. Climax stages of succession have large quantities of biomass, as you can see here, as photosynthesis has resulted in the storage of organic matter. But with large canopies, and you have high GPP and high respiration rates, the photosynthesis respiration ratio will approach 1, and NPP approaches 0. When the rates of respiration are high, by virtue of all parts of the plant respiring, and the rate of respiration equals the rate of photosynthesis, GPP, the ratio is 1, and NPP will be approaching 0. This graph displays the GPP respiration ratio over successional time. You can see that the ratio is high early in succession and approaches 1 late in succession. Early in succession, the pioneer species such as grasses are entirely photosynthetic, and their respiratory roots are small. So the GPP respiration ratio is larger than 1. NPP is relatively high here. But as the trunk and roots become a greater proportion of the entire system, respiration increases, and the GPP respiration ratio approaches 1. NPP is 0 in the climax stages of succession. Again, here is a review of the graphical representations of GPP and respiration over successional time. By now you should be able to imagine the NPP in this region of the graph. Through successional time, NPP will be low, will increase, and then decline to 0 late in succession. So I've examined GPP and respiration as two parameters that change over time through succession. I've hinted at NPP, but let's look at it more closely. Pay close attention here because there are some nuances around NPP early in succession. Here is a graph of NPP over successional time. You should have expected this graph from what I've presented so far. GPP and respiration are both low early in succession due to the low density of plants. Thus, NPP would also be low during the bare earth stages of succession just following disturbance. Then, GPP increases early in succession. Pioneer species such as grasses tend to be entirely photosynthetic, all green as you would see them. The density of producers is increasing, so NPP is also increasing. Remember, though, that respiration remains low because pioneer species have small roots. GPP is greater than respiration through early succession, so NPP is high and increasing. Biomass accumulates. The system is growing. It's important to visualize the system as growing through this time in succession. But late in succession, as the proportion of trunk and root, as the respiratory tissue increases, the rate of respiration approaches the rate of GPP, and NPP declines, approaching 0. Now, we tend to think of NPP as being high during the early stages of succession, and it is. However, you might say to me, but you just showed a graph that indicated NPP to be low during early succession. Okay, now let's think carefully here. The reference to early succession typically speaks to a stage after the bare earth stage, a time seen here when GPP is increasing and NPP is increasing as well. Now here is a table from G.T. Miller that displays various ecosystem characteristics in early and late succession. Notice how plant size changes from small to large. Notice how diversity changes from low to high. Notice how the number of niches changes from few to many. Notice how biomass changes from low to high. And notice NPP, high in early succession. This reference is not meant for the bare earth stage just after the disturbance. This reference is meant for an early successional stage when respiration is lower than GPP and the system is growing. NPP is high and growing. Early successional plants, annual plants, seen here, are fully photosynthetic and respiratory root tissue is small. NPP is high early in succession. Lastly, at the bare earth stage, GPP, NPP, respiration are all low due to the low density of producers. But early in succession, GPP increases while respiration does not, and NPP increases. Late in succession, as the rates of respiration become equal to photosynthesis, NPP declines to approach zero. Late in succession, the photosynthesis respiration ratio approaches 1. Now, it's a good place to take a break from this movie. This is a good place to stop and come back a little later to slide 22. So now, let's take a look at mineral cycling over successional time. Consider how the soil community develops, how the decomposer community develops over successional time. In the earliest stages of succession, there's very little organic matter, very few decomposers. Thus, mineral cycling would be low. But with the arrival of pioneer species, the early successional species, the soil changes. As the density of producers increases through succession, so do the characteristics of the soil. Organic matter increases, and the decomposer community increases. Mineral cycling through the intermediate stages of succession is high. Late in succession, as the individuals become large, nutrients become locked up in the organic matter of the system. Mineral cycling slows. Decomposition rates may be high in the climax forest, but with larger and larger plants, less and less nutrients are available to be cycled within the system. Soils can be quite nutrient poor in the climax stages of succession. Here's a graph showing the rate of mineral cycling over successional time, and you can see that the rate of cycling is low in the earliest moments of succession, before there are significant quantities of organic matter and before the development of a decomposer community. Mineral cycling rises as both organic matter and the decomposer community increase as well. Then, at the climax stages of succession, nutrients become locked up in the large trees, resulting in the decline of mineral cycling. Late in succession, nutrient cycles are closed. The plants produce litter, the decomposers decompose the organic matter, the inorganic nutrients are taken up into the plant, which produces more leaf litter to the decomposers, etc. This closed nutrient cycle system, late in succession, increases stability. Now let's look at the change in diversity across successional time. Diversity is a function of the number of different species and the relative abundance of each species. A system with more different species is more diverse, and a system with 5 species equally represented is more diverse than a system with 5 species where one of the 5 dominates and the others are poorly represented. Diversity increases through successional time because of the greater structural complexity of late successional stages, where there are more niches and more microhabitats. And with more habitats and niches, there is greater species diversity. Diversity generally stays high through late succession. There might be a slight drop in diversity as some of the early to mid-successional species disappear late in succession, but don't focus on the slight drop here. See diversity as increasing and remaining high through succession. It's not difficult to visualize why diversity would be low early in succession. And it's not difficult to visualize the varied microhabitats and multiple niches that exist in late succession, such that diversity would be high in late succession. In a complex system such as this one, the variety of nutrient and energy pathways contributes to its stability. And lastly, for this part of the movie, let's look at biomass. In other words, the ratio of organic to inorganic matter in the system. Producers transform inorganic matter to organic matter through the process of photosynthesis. As NPP increases, biomass accumulates. The system grows. Late in succession, once rates of respiration equal rates of photosynthesis, the NPP declines approaching zero, the biomass accumulation plateaus, levels, no longer increasing. Here's a graph that displays GPP, respiration, and biomass through successional time. Notice that GPP and respiration are measured in rates, but that biomass is a standing mass. It's not a rate. From this graph, we would know that NPP is highest right here. I'll let you study this graph on your own If you have any questions, see me in class. Here's an image that displays zonation along a coastline. There's a gradient with the distance from the shoreline, a gradient in moisture or the presence of salt or sunlight. The species here are maintained in an early successional stage by wave action or possibly the difficulties of exposure to high salinity. Further from the shore, we can see mid-successional stage with intermediate species, shrubs by way of example. Further in still from the shore, there is a climax stage with late successional species. Keep this in mind as I move to the next slide. Here is a summary of changes in the ecosystem during secondary succession. Let's start at the bottom of the table. Food chains from simple to complex. Total biomass from low to high. Mineral cycling, low to high to low. NPP, high to low. Remember, we think of NPP as being high early in succession. The GPP respiration ratio is high early in succession, declining as it approaches 1 and then reaching 1. This is where NPP is 0. Through succession, the characteristics of the species change from annuals to perennials, from poor competitors to good competitors. And there's more. The biological strategies employed by early and late successional species vary widely. But let's take a break from the movie. This is a good place to stop before looking at the characteristics of the species in different stages of succession. The pioneer species are known as R-selected species, while the climax species are known as K-selected species. We'll learn more about these designations later in the course. For the pioneer species, we can see seed production is many, late in succession, few. Seed size is small early in succession, large for the climax species. Seed dispersal is by wind, while late in succession, animals or gravity. Reproductive maturity early in succession is early maturity, while it's late maturity late in succession. The growth rate in early succession is fast. It's slow in later successional species. Shade tolerance is low early in succession, but it's high late in succession. The designation of species in groups referred to as R-selected and K-selected comes from an ecological theory known as RK selection theory. It is a theory based on ecological life strategies or ecological life histories. The R strategists, R is lowercase by the way, are species that tend to spread their reproductive investment among a large number of offspring so that they are well adapted to colonize new habitats rapidly and make opportunistic use of short-lived resources. The K strategists are species that tend to concentrate their reproductive investment in a small number of offspring, thus increasing their survival rate and adapting them for living in long-term climax communities. The S-shaped growth curve seen here describes a theoretical pattern of growth for a population. The R strategists tend to lead lives in the exponential growth portion of the curve in a boom or bust lifestyle, moving quickly as opportunists from one disturbed site to another, always ready to colonize an open site. The K strategists lead lives around carrying capacity, a more stable, long-lived lifestyle, one you would expect from long-lived perennials. Here are more characteristics of R-selected species and K-selected species. Let's specifically look at characteristics a little lower in the table. Short-lived annuals versus longer-lived perennials. Large fluctuation in population size, stable population size. Not persistent in one area as they colonize new sites and then are replaced as they move on. Whereas the K-selected species are persistent, long-lived in one area. The R-selected species provide low quantities of parental care, while the K-selected species provide high quantities of parental care. We'll look more at this later in the course. So here is a table that strengthens some of the characteristics of early and late successional stages. Early succession has low species diversity. Late succession, high diversity. Early in succession, the life strategy is R-selected. Late in succession, it's K-selected. The niche of early successional species is broad. They're opportunist, pioneer species, while in late succession, the species have a very narrow niche specialization. Community structure is simple early in succession and more complex late in succession. At this point, could you speak articulately about food webs, soil community, productivity, available niches, and more through successional time? Could you speak articulately about the structure of different communities through succession, how niches change, how diversity changes, how energy flow changes, GPP, respiration, and MPP? The last IB syllabus statement for this movie is right here. Discuss the relationships among ecosystem stability, succession, diversity, and human activity. This is not a simple statement. Do the best you can to think clearly and work to gain control of various arguments. Stability is a complex issue and poorly understood in terms of rigorous scientific study, but we'll define stability as the likelihood of an ecosystem to return to equilibrium following disturbance. There are two aspects: resilience, the tendency to return to equilibrium following disturbance, and then inertia, which is the tendency to resist change upon disturbance. Does stability increase with succession? Yes, mostly because diversity and the size of storages within systems does contribute to the resilience and affects the speed of response to change. In diverse systems typical of late successional stages, there is stability. In systems with large storages, such as the huge trees of climax stages, there is more stability. Late successional stages, climax stages, are stable with high inertia. They resist change due to the nature of the species. Forests are dominated by perennials, long-lived trees, big individuals, large storages, thus providing stability. As well, there are high levels of interdependence, mutualism, and complex food webs. This is a stable system. So here are 3 IB syllabus statements that you've seen before. Define the term resilience, define the term tipping point, and state that resilience of a system, ecological or social, refers to its tendency to avoid tipping points and maintain stability. Can you relate these terms to succession? So here is a system, let's say late in succession, that oscillates around a value around 120 over a long period of time, displaying steady-state equilibrium. You can see that periodically the oscillations are larger than others, indicating possible disturbance here and here and here. But the disturbances don't push the system far from equilibrium. The system, a climax stage, displays resilience as the system maintains stability. The system displays resilience because it returns to equilibrium following disturbance. Climax stages of succession have greater constancy to the physical environment, thus they're more stable, and the diversity of a climax stage as well as the size of the storages in climax stages both contribute to stability. Here is another stable successional stage, but let's call this one an early successional system, a grassland by way of example. In this case, the system is strongly disturbed here and here and here, but nevertheless the system displays resilience by avoiding a tipping point in which it might be moved to a new equilibrium. Despite the strong disturbances here, here, and here, the system returns to equilibrium, a steady-state equilibrium, over an extended period of time. The small size of the storages in pioneer stages increases the resilience, which provides stability. The grassland will bounce back from disturbance. Early successional stages are easily disturbed, for example, by fire, but they bounce back. They display resilience, stability. Systems can be disturbed to a tipping point, where with positive feedback mechanisms the system is pushed to a new equilibrium. A tipping point is the minimum amount of change within a system that will destabilize the system, causing it to reach a new equilibrium. If the grazers in a grassland whose niche serves to maintain the grasses were, say, removed altogether, the system is pushed beyond a tipping point, moving to a new stage of succession. Or if a late stage of succession is highly disturbed, deforestation for example, a tipping point might be reached and the system may be moved to a new equilibrium. The magnitude of disturbance, in this case massive deforestation, could push the climax stage of succession to a tipping point, potentially a new equilibrium. The system may not recover. An ecosystem's capacity to survive change may depend on its diversity and its resilience. Here are two IB syllabus statements that you've seen before. Diversity and the size of storages within systems can contribute to their stability and affect their speed of response to change. State that delays involved in feedback loops make it difficult to predict tipping points and add to the complexity of modeling systems. In this graph, displaying the relationship between two species, a predator and a prey, we can see the interaction in the rising and falling population sizes over time. There is a time lag between the prey and the predator, as the predator is dependent on the prey. So as the prey population changes, the predator population follows. But when storages are small, as in this case, the time lag is short. But if storages were large, the time lag would be longer. With only two populations, the model here is simple, but larger systems are more complex and more difficult to predict. In climax stages of succession, there are complex food webs, many interconnected links that contribute to stability. As well, the soil community is well developed. Nutrient cycles are closed. Climax stages of succession have large storages, thus they are stable, likely to resist disturbance. But if a forest ecosystem, a climax stage, is strongly disturbed, reaching a tipping point, will it be resilient and bounce back to an original equilibrium? Not likely. Does the abundance of mutualistic relationships in climax forests strengthen stability, or are these specialized relationships vulnerable? Is the interconnectedness of the leafcutter ants and the leaves that they harvest and the fungus that they grow for food an argument for an increase in stability or a decrease in stability, given the highly specialized relationships among these three species? The diversity of a climax stage and the size of storages in climax stages contribute to their stability. The larger storages of late successional stages, the large trees, for example, slow the speed of response to change, but they give the system more inertia, better able to resist change, providing greater stability. The argument for an increase in stability as succession proceeds goes as follows. There's a greater constancy of the physical environment and greater diversity of species. There are more interlinked food webs that might be better able to resist changes imposed on them. There is greater structural heterogeneity in the climax community. We have long-lived species, and there's less fluctuation in the population late in succession. The argument against an increase in stability as succession proceeds goes as follows. More mutual relationships makes for less stability because if one species disappears, then at least one other would also go. Late successional stages would more likely experience fire with the leaf litter buildup on the ground of the forest floor. And in certain situations, disturbance can cause an increase in diversity, maintaining a variety of species with a combination of successional stages. Persistence in time is inertia, and inertia provides stability. It should be obvious that perennials, typical of a climax stage, are persistent by definition. But forests are not necessarily resilient. If disturbed, they do not bounce back quickly. Human activities disrupt systems, often starting the succession process from the beginning. The disturbances caused by people are strong disturbances, often driving systems to a tipping point where new equilibria are reached, and the system is unable to return to an original equilibrium. The disturbances to ecosystems by human activities tend to simplify ecosystems, and simplified ecosystems display reduced stability. Even in resilient systems like grasslands, the frequency of fire is often accelerated by people. If the frequency of disturbance increases, systems become simplified and become less stable. Think carefully about human activities simplify ecosystems. Look at this agricultural system. It's a monoculture, a single species. There is regular plowing and pesticides, herbicides are sprayed, further reducing the diversity of the system. This is not a stable system. Compare this system to the original habitat. Humans maintain the system in an early stage of succession. A single species is grown. It's a monoculture. It's a simplified system because of human activities. Stability is reduced. Compare this system to the original habitat. Humans maintain the system in an early stage of succession. A single species is grown. It's a monoculture. It's a simplified system because of human activities. Stability is reduced. And while agriculture is designed to increase NPP, to help feed the world's population, what kind of system do we have here? And that brings us to the end of IBESS Ecosystems and Ecology 2, Part 5.